are you capturing all the data you need to capture? Are you putting it in a place where it can be managed? Is it catching all the context? Because that is one of the secret ingredients of making things work. How are you coping with technology and systems that you do not understand? And that go back to the first principles and insist that you have an understanding.
We are genuinely privileged and honored to have Dr. Usama Fayyad with us today, all the way from Boston. And it is a real, genuine privilege to have him here and talk about all things data, everything about AI and generative AI, because it's just so topical at this point in time. And really, every single business person and educational person at this point in time is having nightmares of what's next. He is going to hopefully tell us a few secrets about the things that we should be looking at and hopefully some insights into the future. Dr. Usama, welcome and wonderful to have you. It's wonderful for you to be here. It's, yeah, tell us about yourself. Who are you and why are we here today?
Thank you, Tarek, and good to be joining you here. My name is Usama Fayyad. I'm the chairman of Open Insights and the inaugural executive director of the Institute for Experiential AI at Northeastern University. I spent most of my life after my PhD in AI machine learning applying AI and machine learning to scientific data sets when I was at JPL, NASA JPL and Caltech, to corporate and commercial data sets when I joined Microsoft, left Microsoft, did a couple of startups. The second one got acquired by Yahoo. I became the world's first chief data officer, emphasizing kind of the role of data in getting AI and predictive AI in particular to work, and now, of course, generative AI. I formed Open Insights after leaving Yahoo, but took a break to be the global chief data officer at Barclays Bank, which is a global universal bank in my time, to basically learn kind of how a bank works from the inside out. And through Open Insights and through the Institute, we work with companies and organizations around the world in figuring out how do they activate their data, how do they get value out of it, and how do they make AI work in practice.
You know, when we talk about AI at the moment, it's talking to somebody about electricity 300 years ago, or the steam engine 400 years ago. It's fundamentally changing the game and changing the world as we know it. Is that too much of an exaggeration, Dr. Usama?
No, the change is not an exaggeration. I think maybe people exaggerate what they expect the technology to be capable of doing. A lot of people, when you say AI, think about systems that understand what's going on, they can reason, they can figure out what's right from wrong, they can make the right decisions, they do better than humans. None of this is true. I mean, this is basically predictive technology that, because of two things, has hit kind of a singularity point in terms of its impact on society. And I'll say the two things. One, the biggest thing is because of digitization and because of the evolution of computerization, we have been growing a lot of data all over the place. So the data has been growing, I would say, even super exponentially over the past few decades. That data enabled, when you couple it with things like machine learning, predictive algorithms, and so forth, has fueled a whole industry of saying, look, I may not understand how human intelligence works. I may not be able to simulate it, which is the goal of AI, but I can certainly approximate it by looking at data that tells me what are the right decisions and outcomes under certain input conditions. Now, the thing that makes a difference now, and there have been breakthroughs in AI over the ages. At one point in time, people thought that, hey, if you could get a better chess player than some humans, then you probably cracked what intelligence means. Today, the cheapest chess player can beat the grandmasters around the world in chess. However, no one stops to think that, hey, we cracked intelligence because of that.
Sure.
I think the difference now, which is the third factor that's so important, the difference with this breakthrough and why it has become economically so important is the fact that we have grown a knowledge economy. In the wealthier nations, the knowledge economy is about, according to the UN, 31 to 34% of the economy. And you suddenly had a technology that, coupled with the data and the huge computation capabilities, you can now do something that will accelerate a lot of this knowledge work. And much of this knowledge work is mundane, it's robotic, it's repetitive. That is our own creation as a society. And here comes a solution where the technology can say, you actually don't need a human to copy stuff from here to there or to take a first guess at this or that. A machine could do it if you fed it enough data and enough computation. And that's what's been happening. And that's why it has an impact. So scientifically, I don't think, for example, generative AI is going to be scientifically interesting over the next couple of years. But economically, it's super interesting because of its impact on the knowledge economy. And that is the big difference between kind of having a better chess player or a better Jeopardy player or a better game of Go player or a better game of life player versus having something that actually impacts the knowledge economy so much.
It's interesting you're saying that because we sort of reached an inflection point very, very recently because of the size of data, the speed of data computation, the computers are not cheap, processing, tagging, all of these things become much, much more accessible and expensive. So suddenly the exponential curve has taken over. Well, my concern and my thought is, let's take a step back and perhaps you can correct me in terms of the definition of AI. We have narrow AI, which is the basic computational stuff and so on. Then we have the general AI, and then a more advanced AI in the future. We are still in the narrow space, or narrow enhanced a little bit. But what a lot of things that humans can do in basic calculation, facial recognition, a lot of those things are becoming extremely viable through the various AI that is available. So 60, 70, 80% of the day-to-day things that we are doing are now available on through AI. Where I'm going with this question is that I think where the concern comes in is that the last 20%, which is creativity, imagination, judgment, ethics, culture, whatever, those things will still have a lead for the foreseeable future. But how much of that knowledge economy will be taken over, and what will happen to human beings in that process?
Yeah, so I don't know if I agree with the percentages and how you defined it. I'll say the following: a lot of tasks, if you have enough data and willing to spend enough compute, can be addressed with these algorithms. Be they through learning algorithms and through AI algorithms, you can actually approximate or simulate a lot of these small tasks. We are definitely in the world of narrow AI, where narrow means a solution that works on a given problem and might work better than humans, like a chess player,
sure,
has nothing to say about how to play another game or how to do strategy or whatever. Zero, right? So that's the definition of the narrow AI. General AI does not exist today. The only instance of general AI that we know about is through human intelligence and a few other animals that we consider intelligent or exhibit intelligent behavior. So to me, the difference is that society has evolved to a point where a lot of the tasks we do became now addressable by machine. But a lot of these tasks, did not need to be addressed by humans. I mean, I liken this very much to the agricultural revolution, when we started using tools and animals and then machines. A lot of the stuff humans were trying to do by hand or by a single person is ridiculous, right? It should not have been done by humans, and we figured that out. Now that revolution changed how society worked. It caused a lot of advancement. It had its impact on the environment. The same happened with the Industrial Revolution, when we suddenly realized, hey, we can build the machines and we can leverage machines to do a heck of a lot more things. Again, it's happening now on the knowledge worker front. And that's because knowledge work has evolved. And like the other fields, it evolved in ways where a lot of the stuff in it is too repetitive and shouldn't be done by humans, should be done by machines to begin with.
Indeed. So I've seen a beautiful chart in terms of ChatGPT, and that in terms of all written information, it's at about 90% plus already, and perhaps by the end of the year, 100%, almost near 100% of all information that has written at any point in time will be available in a data format that is accessible. But today, apparently, it's well over 90%. I can share that chart with you. Now, if we are looking at a system which is all-knowing, which is omniscient, which makes it, by definition, all-powerful, which is omnipotent, I'm almost getting to God here. So, if we have a system which is omniscient and omnipotent by definition, isn't that fundamentally going to change the game by creating an environment which knows everything? So end of news and media as we know it, end of search as we know it, end of advertising as we know it, because we can just ask the machine what it is and you just get the answer. Why the hell do we need advertising anymore? And basically it learns your behavior set and gives you all the answers. So everything just changes completely. Or am I'm being provocative intentionally?
Yeah. So I mean, first of all, here are areas of disagreement, right? The 90% statistics of that stuff being available to something like a ChatGPT, not true. Very, very far from it. In fact, the first attempts at building GPT 1, 2, and 3, and then of course later 3.5 and 4, they first attempted to feed it a lot of data from the internet, and they had to backtrack very quickly because they realized that the data from the internet is A, contradictory, B, much of it is false, lots of hate speech, lots of other issues in there. So then they went back and invested a lot of dollars in curation. So basically they started controlling, well, how much data do we feed it? By the way, I mean, GPT-3, which is the last generation of GPT where OpenAI remained open, they haven't spoken much about 3.5 and 4.0. The data that went into training GPT-3 is less than a terabyte of data, right? So it's not much. And by the way, that's a secret to its strength. It was kind of selected data, curated, so they cleaned up a lot of the internet data, they removed the inconsistencies, then they went to things like Wikipedia and said, well, people here make judgment calls and clean it up, so let's leverage that. And then, of course, they found themselves going to scientific literature because there it's much harder to get anything published when you're stating false facts or you have a hidden agenda or anything like that. Now, so first of all, to begin with, by definition, the data that's fed into GPT is limited and very curated. And by the way, it's not up to date because the expense of retraining GPT and any large language model of that class, it's so expensive that it's not practical to do it, which is why ChatGPT cannot do recent news. It cannot do recent information, etc. Now, this actually, what you said applies to something like Google search, right? I believe it. If you told me that the reach of search engines can reach now 90% or 95% of everything that's been written by humans, I'll say yes. And my answer also is, well, that hasn't, it hasn't really, it changed how we work. It changed what it means for us to retain and learn and when to learn and how to learn. It made us as humans more powerful, but it hasn't replaced the need for human judgment. And this is the key here. none of these algorithms, when we start talking about omniscient and so forth, none of the AI algorithms, none of the search algorithms have a real understanding of what they are consuming. The term I like in the literature for large language models is statistical parrots. So these things don't understand what they're saying, or sorry, stochastic parrots. They don't understand what they're saying. You get some variety in what they generate. That's the stochastic part or the random part. But they are parrots. They're just saying stuff. Now, when we perceive it, we say, oh, just like this chess player can beat the best human, it must be intelligent, and we attribute intelligence to it, very far from having any understanding of what's going on by that program. The same should be viewed on things like large language models today. Now, maybe one day we'll get to that point, but today we are still in the world of very narrow AI, and the algorithms that portend generality have this property today, which is very disturbing. They don't understand what they're saying. There is no common sense reasoning, which is an unsolved problem in AI. There is no even basic reasoning, let alone common sense about domains and so forth. So we're very far from that goal.
Thank you for that clarification. Much appreciated. And I'm way more relieved than I was before we started this, because I've been seeing, I will send you that graph, which shows up to 90%, which is an interesting one. Now, we've spoken a lot about all of these topical issues on AI. May I just do a little flashback into the early part of your life? Tell us your background. Where are you from? Were there early inspirations that you'd like to share? How did you end up being who you are today?
Yeah, I mean, who knows? But I was born in Carthage, Tunisia, North Africa. My father worked for the UN, so we moved around many countries. Kind of finished high school. The last, say, 6-7 years of school were in Jordan, and from there came to the US as an undergrad student. I would say that the things that shaped me is, I mean, I was always determined to be an engineer. Through engineering, I started feeling the power of mathematical modeling and its ability to allow us to kind of scale thinking. I did electrical engineering and computer engineering. And through that, got my exposures. And in grad school, I mean, after the master's degree, I did a master's in computer engineering and a master's in math, because I was getting into math and what it means to compute and understand stuff. Those two things were very influential. But the thing then I discovered, hey, as a graduate student at a top university, you could actually stay a student forever, and all you do is take courses, learn, etc. So that became my goal for a while, until I kind of got bored with that. But those were the most shaping years, because those were kind of the late 80s, early 90s, when AI was making kind of serious contributions, data was becoming more common, and I started getting exposed to problems by, during the academic year, I would be a student forever, and during the summers, I would do internships at places like General Motors research labs, working on how to use the data they have about car repairs to build automatically systems that can predict what's wrong with a car. The same happened with an internship at NASA's JPL, where I ended up taking my first job. But those gave me a taste for the power of what happens when you put these learning algorithms, and machine learning was my primary field in my PhD, to work on problems. And I worked with Hughes Electronics on how do you optimize the process of etching wafers, how to create basically computer chips and other things.
Right.
So a lot of areas where it showed me that computers can do better than humans in settings where you have a lot of data and little understanding of the processes underneath them. Right. And that kind of started my bias in my research. My research was pretty mathematical, but I always insisted on making it work in real settings. And that combination proved to be very, very useful, because when you try to make something work in an application, there's a ground truth that basically says either it works or it doesn't. And you can't just get away with an academic excuse that says, well, under these conditions, this thing is the greatest algorithm ever invented. No, it actually worked in the setting where there's reality and there is, you know, you have to actually make stuff actually work in the constraints that humans have to make it work under. So that, I would say, is most of what shaped me into it. And I think the chance to join Northeastern to run the Institute for Experiential AI was kind of the ultimate step in this journey, because, you know, after having been exposed to so many uses of AI in so many different companies, verticals, areas, healthcare to banking to manufacturing to telco, I realized that we need to now figure out how do we go back from an academic and research perspective and understand what it takes to make AI really work. And this is where the term experiential AI comes. It's our code for AI with the human in the loop. So there are secrets to making AI work. One of them is you absolutely need continuous human intervention. Whether you're a Google search engine or a ChatGPT from OpenAI, there's a lot of human intervention that these companies don't talk about, continuous. And the second one is data. You need a lot of data, and it has to be the right data. So what does it mean? How do you do AI responsibly? How do you address the ethical issues that come up? And how do you assemble those data sets to avoid the biases? Because with these algorithms, because there is no understanding and no judgment, it's garbage in, garbage out.
Understood. You know, an old saying which we've encountered, that data became the new oil for a lot of us over the last 10 years or so. And we use this analogy in some of the presentations that we do, that the price of a barrel of oil at the moment is around $75. But a price of racing fuel is around $1,050. So there's a 17x increase. And oil has a lot of characteristics and attributes of data. You can replicate it, you can enhance it, you can slice it, dice it, change it, and, you know, and make different things and products out of it. One of the advantages that data has is that oil is consumable, while data can be replicated and keep on growing. So the 17x increase and that delta between where people's data is today in a sort of stranded data in a company or in an environment versus where it could be is some of the work that we are doing jointly. Would you like to give your insights for, let's say, a CEO or CIO or a chairman of a board who's looking at all of these data assets and saying, yes, I hear about data modernization and data monetization, but how do you make it 10x? What are the elements that they need to know as they look at this particular issue?
Yeah, the data is so essential, yet so misunderstood, right? So if you talk to the executive team of an organization or the CEO, they'll say, well, we have plenty of data. We're recording it, right? We see a lot of analytics that tell us how the business is doing. Yeah. Those are the companies who consider themselves advanced in that world. Two things. Number one is there's no good understanding of how to capture enough data and enough context with that data and how to make it accessible together, right? So if you talk to a large hospital system, well, yeah, they collect data about what they do with patients. But if you say, well, give me what happened to this patient, even though there's a whole requirement by law in the United States that all of this stuff should be put in their electronic health record, their EHR, most of that data is actually not captured. Most of that data is sitting on, you know, stuff that's written by hand or recorded somewhere where it goes away because they erase it, like your vitals and a lot of that stuff. And the misunderstanding comes from the fact that when you talk about products consumable by humans of data, so when you look at the results of analytics and insights, you want summarized, aggregated views of the data. Here's what happens on average, and here's what we see, and here's unusual things. Algorithms work on a completely different level. They need very detailed data because all their knowledge comes from the data of like micro things in events and fine-grained stuff that humans find, ununderstandable and annoying, but it's essential. That craft of knowing how to gather that data with all its details and how to organize it in such a way where you can retrieve it in an economically reasonable way and put it together on demand in different views so the algorithms can be powered does not exist. And this is what we spent a lot of my years at Open Insights and a lot of my efforts at places like Yahoo and Barclays, and then with a lot of the companies we worked with, even at Microsoft, in figuring out how to crack that problem and how to get people to get systematic about collecting all that data, but not just recording it, because it's easy to record it, representing it in ways where it can be used by algorithms. That is a very, very big missing component. Now, the companies who do AI, the Open AIs, the Googles, the Amazons, the Facebooks, and so forth, they know this very well. And they invest a lot in gathering that data and putting it in systems that allow them to have access, easy access by algorithms. The rest of the world doesn't. And that is the big kind of divide between what I call the AI haves, who are probably 40 or 50 companies around the world, and the AI have-nots, who are the majority, 99.999% of companies who are sitting across the divide watching as the divide gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And the trick there is capturing all that data they generate from their operations, which has a lot of IP about what they do, and exploiting it. And that is what's being wasted.
Thank you for that insight. So what does a chairman do? I'm an advisor in a listed company here and a few government organizations on general futuristic work. But when it gets down to data, what advice would you as an expert give to a CEO or a chairman in terms of what do they need to do now? How should they move tomorrow? What are the tough choices do they have to make immediately?
Look, when digitization started happening, the digital transformation, the companies who didn't embrace it, many of them, despite being around for centuries, started disappearing, right? And that is scaring a lot of the boards now of saying, is this going to happen on my watch here with this AI stuff? The problem is it's happening when they're not even understanding what the underpinning foundations for enabling AI are, which are data and human intervention to capture that knowledge that only people have, no machines have, and no data has, and fuse it with that data that they should be collecting the right way. So my biggest advice is AI cannot be ignored. It's going to be a game changer in the knowledge economy. It's going to enable, many jobs will be not replaced by AI, but replaced by a person who's using AI. Many companies will replace companies who don't use AI and make them obsolete. So how do you lay the foundation that will enable you to play this AI game? How do you collect the right data? And how do you insist that we capture a lot of the knowledge and interactions? And how do you start leveraging it right away so that you're elevating the performance level of your employees and the competitiveness of your company, and kind of starting that virtuous cycle, instead of being in the bad cycle, which is you're just watching competitors grab that data, use it, and transform, and you're falling way behind in that divide. So that is very, very important to keep a track of. So my advice to the top leadership is think very hard about the data, insist about the ability to capture the right data that can power algorithms, and insist that AI start being implemented, even at a small scale, because it will give that educational level to the employees and the culture. The second part is, of course, awareness. How do you get your employees, all the way from the leaders down to the bottom of the bottom rung of the company? How do you get them some level of understanding? What is this AI? Why is data important in it? Why? How does it work? and the fact that it is a competitive advantage that we need to be aware of, understand. And as important as understanding what the technology can do is understanding what the technology cannot do and why it fails. So a lot of my time these days is working with boards and with executive teams on making sure they understand what works, what doesn't, and how to make it work correctly and responsibly.
Dr. Sama, when I'm at a board and I'm presenting keynotes and stuff like that, one of the key things people ask me is, what's my number one job there? What am I doing? And my response is, and I love your thoughts on it, my response is that it's about mindset shift. My job at a board level, at a leadership level, is about mindset shift. And I feel that I hit what I call the immune system response of companies, of individuals, or whatever. And that immune system basically is anything that's coming from outside. My immune system is immediately going to go out there and block it. And I find that a very interesting challenge. It's sort of getting better over the last year or so because the fear level is going up. The fear of not doing something is going up. And therefore their immune system is now being adjusted a little bit more. What do we need to do to shock that immune system of people? Because I am at a loss sometimes to me, it's so damn obvious. And to them is, well, let's leave it for another year. We'll look at it next year's thing. And yes, we'll organize our data lake later. Do we really need it? And just keep moving it along and just grow it 5 to 10%, and then that's it.
Yeah.
What do you tell them to jar them into action?
Well, it's at two levels. So number one is this is natural and will be with us forever. People who are on a certain business, whose legacy business is actually profitable, generating enough to kind of meet their needs and so forth, they are going to be, and correctly so, suspicious of anybody trying to tell them, hey, what you're doing needs to be changed, right? Change. The techniques I use is to basically say, look, change is not bad. Change is a necessity. And if you don't embrace change, really bad stuff can happen. So number one is you got to open your mind up to accepting that change, and now change is accelerating more. And then you use examples. So I use Kodak, which was around for a century and a half. They invented digital photography. They invented the digital camera, but they stuck to their bread and butter business, which is film and chemicals. And sure enough, the world embraced the digital camera while they didn't. And the world of photography completely went digital. After a century and a half almost, Kodak had to go bankrupt. And this is a company that survived, not just the World War. They survived the Depression. They survived the first pandemic of the Spanish flu. They survived all sorts of weird events over time. The same happened with Xerox and the famous book, Fumbling the Future. They invented a lot of the stuff that became standard in computers, like the mouse and the graphical interface. They didn't embrace it. The same thing happened with retailers like JCPenney, who at 115 years old had to declare bankruptcy. So, and because they didn't digitize. So you use those examples, and then you use positive examples of, here are companies who embrace digitization and either became large players, disruptors, or actually saved their business by going back and saying, no, we're going to focus on digitization and data and AI, and here's how we save the business. And there's many examples of those. I think those kinds of arguments will kind of trigger at least openness to say, okay, I should not make the association that change is bad. And so what is now the reasonable change? And what you then have to couple it with is, what is the playbook? What is the formula that says, look, we're not saying abandon your old business. We're not saying give up anything. We're saying begin incrementally and see how it makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
And that is how you start the virtuous cycle.
I use something I call the Google's golden rule, 70-20-10 rule. 70% of your time on your core business, 20 on your business extension, and 10% of your time on blue sky thinking, on moonshots and so on. So on the 70%, which is their comfort zone, we innovate, we optimize, we do the analytics, we make them, and start shifting the culture on that 70%, but be a little bit more bold on the 20%. So that is the only way I have discovered that it is a little bit more manageable, because they're only now looking at 20% as the extension of the business and building the future. And that's been part of that process. Another statement, one of my professors, Marshall Goldsmith, who's a great coach, CEO coach, he says, well, he wrote a book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. So, the brilliance with which you created your billion-dollar company is exactly what's holding you back, and which potentially is your biggest vulnerability. And that's a very difficult one to tackle, but we do that. Dr. Usama, a couple of really more human things that I'd like to share with you, and then we'll just end on some of your thoughts with reference to the future. I speak about trust and truth and ethics as being fundamental to our existence, especially moving forward. And in this world of technology, and in this world where we don't trust our leaders, we don't trust our governments, we don't trust our parliaments, we don't trust our institutions, the premium on trust is extremely high, probably higher than ever before. And now in a generative AI space, I think perhaps trust is becoming even more important. What are your thoughts on trust, truth, and ethics in today's world?
Yeah, no, this is a super critical area. So one of the biggest areas of emphasis at the Institute for Experiential AI is responsible AI, which is how to avoid the ethical issues, how to assess risks, and how do you take a posture that allows you to kind of deal and mitigate with these risks that are inherent anytime you make machines more capable and more intelligent. But I like your use of the word trust. So there is responsible AI, which is part of the trust, right? You need to ensure that you're not doing anything, ethically bad with these algorithms. And these algorithms, because they're very biased to the data, if the data has any bias in it, the algorithm will actually conclude very conclusively some very biased things that are pretty bad and could be bad for humanity, depending on what you use it for. So there's the responsible AI part of it. And then there is what we call trustworthy AI, or how do you build trust in AI? And that comes from a few things that have to do with its accuracy, its consistency, its stability, what we call graceful degradation. When something goes wrong, it doesn't go wrong super bad. It goes wrong just in small increments, allowing you to intervene and so forth. And that is a whole new area that is extremely important. How do we get people to trust these algorithms and trust in the fact that they're not going to go off on a tangent? Today, large language models, and this gets worse the larger the language model gets, are very unstable. Any changes, we don't understand, a small change in the data could completely change the outcome that the algorithm would produce, which is not a hallmark of how people act. There are famous examples, by the way, and remember, we do large language models when you feed it English, but you could be feeding it code, you could be feeding it images, you could be feeding it videos. There's these famous examples of images where it's an image of a cat, but you change one pixel, and suddenly the algorithm will start saying, well, this is a dog. When to a human, one pixel in an image doesn't change anything, pretty much, right? Yeah. That tells you how these algorithms behave differently and key in on very different features than humans do. Yeah. So we need to figure out, how do we change this so that people get used to it? And this comes from both ensuring accuracy and testability and verification, and ensuring stability and behavior under different circumstances. The famous Boeing 737 MAX examples where, nobody thought the algorithm was sound, that basically said, hey, if you detect this, go down. But nobody thought that what happens when the sensor goes bad. And in a normal situation like this, you would have a redundancy of sensors and you would test. And this happens in the human brain a lot. Well, we didn't do it in this engineering solution, and it was unfortunately tied directly, without the possibility of intervention, to the guidance system of the aircraft. So the pilot was trying to do the opposite, and the plane would not listen to the pilot because the engineers thought the algorithm knows better. So that's an example of how do you systematically detect these potential points of failure, potential points of instability, and then govern them correctly. And that's really critical for acceptance and for doing AI responsibly.
Absolutely. So I have two words which really scare me. And first is greed, and the other is power. And these two define human behavior to a very, very great extent, sadly. Have you watched the current, the new Mission Impossible movie?
Yes.
So this I watched it about a month ago, and I said, "Oh my God, I've been talking about exactly this for the last 6-9 months. That your AI knows a lot and is gone rogue." And then I watched a movie on Netflix called Art of Stone, which is exactly the same theme. And the AI was scored hot, which was interesting because it was all science, it was all logic, but it was 95% accurate. Uh, and can we live a world and a life with 5% inaccuracy in terms of where human intervention starts coming in? What I'm saying is that this is now becoming part of our social narrative, part of our day-to-day thing, and Hollywood is generally a little bit ahead. What are the kinds of things that the governments are doing and institutions are doing? Because I think United Nations, World Health Organization, IMF, World Bank, all of these were created 80, 90 years ago for a completely different problem, for a completely different time in our lives. If they can't control Facebook or whatever, how can they control AI in its current format? And just leaving it to people who are doing it for money, and just make more money, and money gives them power. Sorry, I'm getting on my soapbox here, but I think it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that they will do what is best for them rather than what is best for humanity. And how do we control that?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's no doubt that more and more regulation is coming. We'll probably actually see serious regulation start evolving. I would say Europe first, then likely China, and then the US will follow, and then the rest of the world. You must have guardrails. And guardrails, I always say, you know, we build sports cars that have great brakes, not because we want the cars to go slower, but we want to enable them to go faster, safer. So, and putting in those guidelines and putting in the principles that say, you know, here are things you can do, here are things you cannot do, allows the good guys to kind of build within that framework and advance the technology faster without worrying about, hey, is somebody going to come after me and liability and all that. But liability is very important. Accountability is very important. I am today, realistically, my solution to this problem, and I'm not a lawyer, but I think the right solution that's pragmatic is we need to insist that the machine does not have a right to decide, that every decision or recommendation is attributable to a human or a legal entity that bears the responsibility, the liability. Once you do that, you kind of introduce the natural, you control that greed and that uncontrollable desire to advance, which is also part of why human beings are so successful. But you kind of give them reason to pause and think and slow down a little bit when something is not very well understood. And that's exactly what you need until you figure out what the rules of the road are. Hey, what are the traffic signals? And when do you go, when do you stop? And what speed limits should be imposed and all of that. We don't know any of that today. But what we should be holding accountable is you can't say the algorithm did it. It has to be a human who is held liable and responsible for what that algorithm did because they accepted the recommendation.
Dr. Usama, thank you very much for that. I mean, we're looking, and the podcast and the conversation we're having is called Voices of the Future. You are indeed an amazing voice for the future. As we amplify this voice into the future, what sort of advice do you have for young people of today, the Gen Z who has been brought up in this generation, and basically they use this literally as a very routine activity? What are the kinds of things that they need to be thinking about? And for the older people, our generation, what are the things that we need to be aware of on a day-to-day basis within the AI space and in general society, as you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not so much of a futurist. I'm much more kind of, I live in today and today's concerns, but I will tell you the following that I believe very strongly is the case. The AI of today is very simple and very stupid. So people should not be fooled or engage. And this, by the way, I would be saying this advice 30 years from today and 50 years from today. It is simple. It is fairly stupid. Don't assume too much on its part. My advice to the younger generation is it's important to figure out how to leverage this technology. It's important to figure out how to understand the points of failure. And most importantly, the basics become more and more important. Mathematics and engineering evolved as a way for human beings to figure out how to scale to things like larger structures, larger complications, more complicated drugs, new things, all of that. The role of science, engineering, and mathematics is increasing in importance so fast. The perception that these machines can have reasoning and understanding and can do math is increasing as a perception, and in reality, their abilities as tools are definitely increasing, but they have no ability to reason, innovate, think, understand. So it's very, very important for us to figure out and develop kind of the mathematical models that allow us to understand. How do you figure out what's going on inside that large language model if you're becoming dependent on it in certain functions of the knowledge economy? And how do you know when something is going to hit a danger zone? How do you model the effect of changing data, of an update, etc.? All of those would require a lot of human thinking, a lot of engineering thinking, a lot of scientific evaluation. So those fields are becoming more and more and more important. I would couple them as we give more and more power to the algorithms and rely on them more heavily. We need to evolve a similar kind of understanding of what does it take to do responsible AI and ethical practice of AI. You know, in medicine, ethics evolved a long time ago because people recognized the power that physicians could have. As biotech evolved, they evolved a set of very good ethical guidelines, and they continue to evolve. Something very similar around ethical guidelines for how to do AI correctly need to be paid attention to.
One final comment from me, and then one final question to you. One of my final comments is very closely associated with what you just said, and that is that my keynotes and so on, I'd say that the more technological and mathematical that we become, the more human we need to be. So love, harmony, empathy, values, common sense, judgment, heart, spirit, soul, prayer, all of these things become a million times more valuable. So we need to now hopefully refocus our attention not just to science and math, but also to all of these human attributes, because that is what will keep giving us the lead, and just use all of these things as tools. I have this as a tool. It cannot replace me, but it's a tool for me. And as long as we just use this as a tool, and the analogy that I use is riding a horse. The horse is bigger, faster, and stronger than us, but we ride it. We control it. We give it an apple to keep it happy. We ride it. So we need to see technology as a horse, and then we find ways to learn how to ride and learn the rules to do that. So that was a final comment from me. My final request to you, or rather final question to you, with a view to looking into the future, is if you put a message in a bottle today and it pops out and we find it in the sea in 2030, what will it say? What did Dr. Usama say in the year 2023? And how did he visualize things evolving and something meaningful?
Well, it might be a bit too nerdy, but I think my message will say what I keep saying today to many companies. It's the same message. Are you capturing all the data you need to capture? Are you putting it in a place where it can be managed? Is it catching all the context? because that is one of the secret ingredients of making things work. The other message will be, how are you coping with technology and systems that you do not understand? And that go back to the first principles and insist that you have an understanding. As technology gets more complex, I mean, I agree with the statement you made, and the statement is not futuristic. It actually goes throughout the history of evolution of the human civilization. At times, certain civilizations go haywire in one direction or another, but generally speaking, general guidelines, whether they come from philosophy, sometimes they get codified in religions, sometimes they get codified in other principles of democracy, freedom, and so forth. Those are very, very important as governing rules that we impose and insist on preserving, because that is what's going to save us and keep us from going off into some of these bad directions that previous civilizations took. And I'm hopeful. I mean, historically, we have shown that at least human civilizations have adapted and evolved correctly. Right now, one of my truly biggest worries is, what are we doing to the environment and to the climate? And, you know, are we hitting the point of no return, and is it too late? Who knows? I remain very hopeful that with education and science, we can address a lot of these challenges if we're determined to. The question is, can we catch them in time before it's too late?
And we're doing a lot of work on sustainability, climate change, and the environment also. Dr. Usama, it's been an absolute privilege. On this philosophical and hopeful note, we'd like to bring this to an end. And I'm grateful that you shared so many stories, and we will certainly put all of these messages out there and amplify your voice into the future, and hopefully it will help a lot of people. Thank you very much indeed, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck with your project.